Well, I would like to welcome everybody to our commemoration of the 100th birthday of St. John Paul II. And I would like to welcome most of all Dr. Ludwick, the president of the University of St. Thomas, who's joining me as I speak from the parlor room at the John Paul II Institute at the University of St. Thomas. Welcome, Dr. Ludwick.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hittinger. It's truly an honor and a pleasure for me to be here with you as you host this event to commemorate the 100th birthday of St. Pope John Paul II. It's truly an amazing centenary.
Well, what I would like to do is to share with you some of the videos and pictures. So you don't have to go get the popcorn, but you are going to watch a few of our videos. And the reason for this is not simply for the travel log, but to share with you and who's ever watching about the unique programs we have at the University of St. Thomas that are inspired by John Paul II's combination of faith and reason, but most of all this new MA that we've started at the Institute that you have been very supportive in launching, that we study John Paul II in the context of Polish history and culture. This is well explained by George Weigel in his books, but we are actually implementing it at this university through our study abroad with undergraduates. We will soon include graduate students, but also in our course of studies. We are very aware of and make an effort to include Polish studies, Polish history, and culture. So that's what we have in store today, Dr. Ludwick.
Well, I'm just so enthusiastic about all of this, to hear about your trips to Poland and to see where you visited. Melinda, my wife, and I, we were in Poland a couple of years ago, and it was just a phenomenal opportunity for us. We unfortunately didn't have you with us, and we didn't have a chance to visit all the places that you and our students go. So I'm really eager to hear and to see what you're sharing today. The university is also going back in the summer of 2021, and we already have a list of people who want to go. It's a pretty incredible list already. So we're excited to do that. Again, that's the summer of 2021. So this is kind of like a preview of coming attractions, if you will. So thank you for sharing it with me.
Yes, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank, all of the students who have been to Poland with me. Now we've gone 3 times. Unfortunately, we had to postpone this year's trip. Many of them took pictures and videos that I'll be using. I took some. Most of all, though, I would like to thank Jairo Guerrero, a UST student who graduates this year with a BA in Communications, Philosophy, and Spanish. He took a lot of the video that we will be viewing. I would also like to thank Father Witold Kania of the Katowice Diocese, who's been a great friend, tour guide, and pilgrimage leader. We spend 15 days in country, staying at 3 bases in Katowice, Kraków, and Czerna. Father Witold is with us all the time and even assists in driving one of the 2 vans around to our various sites. So I'll even share with you here some of to see what it's like on the road with these vans and some of the places we stay. They are either right in the monastery, pilgrimage houses. Since pilgrimage is a big thing in Poland, they have many places of hospitality, and that's where we stay. So in this area of south central Poland, it's a very strategic place because, as you know from your study of Poland in JP2, that Polish history and Polish consciousness is still dominated by this memory of 120 plus years of partition in which Poland was taken apart by the 3 powers, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. And there were attempts to suppress their history. They took their political life away, but even language and religion was suppressed by these powers. So where we go is right by where that partition occurred. So we are in Krakow, which is part of the Austrian sector. We are in Czestochowa, which was under the Russian domination, and Katowice was under the Prussian or German. And I think it's entertaining just to see this old postcard that there's still a spot that we drive by called the Point of Three Caesars, where the three powers come together. And Father Witold pointed out to me, if you're on that spot in south central Poland where the Russian sector begins and look to the east, the Russian Empire went all the way up through Alaska to the US border. So again, it's amazing to think Polish history, how much not only they suffered, but just what a remarkable history and area of the world this is. Now, I'm going to choose 5 places to share with our audience today. Really 4 places. They will be his birthplace, Wadowice, where it started 100 years ago. Of course, we've got to go there. Then we will go to Kalwaria Zebrzydowska, a mouthful, but one of the great pilgrim spots in Poland. It's on the United Nations list of heritage sites, and you'll see our students making a little pilgrimage on this unique place in Poland, I think unique in the world and beloved to John Paul II. Then we will go to Krakow and see where he lived as a young man when he went to the university, the parish where he discerned his vocation to the priesthood. And the last place we'll look is actually not on the map. Surprisingly, it's not in George Weigel's book, although he refers to this influence. It's called Czerna, and it's one of the Carmelite monasteries in the hills of Krakow. And I hope, Richard, we will get to visit there during our trip next year. Now I'm going to show you a little chart that I put together, and for the viewers trying to get a handle on this great saint, this great man, John Paul II. He was a man of many talents and gifts, and he struggled in his first 20-some years to bring them together, to make sense of all the things that he had, that he could do, that he loved, that he had talent for, and that he felt a vocation to serve. And just by chance, it turns out to be 6 P's, you could say, that he was Pope John Paul II. He was a man of prayer. He was the man from Poland, the son of Poland, he would often say. But in these great things that he did, he began as a poet and actor, started as a philosopher, and would carry that through as a profession. But the crown of his life was really being a priest. So, do you like my chart, Dr. Ludwick?
It's terrific. I think it captures it very well. You know, he's one of those inspirational figures that as time goes by, I think we're going to come to appreciate all elements of his life.
Yes, and again, that's something we do in our MA program here. It studies both philosophy and theology. We look at his poetry and plays. As I said, we look at his Polish roots. And of course, prayer is the constant message of John Paul II. It was the priesthood that crowned his life and brought them all together. I mean, being a priest was really the essential thing. Being pope, in a way, was secondary. Being a cardinal archbishop, he was a priest. And how does he explain his role as priest? He goes to the passage from 1 Corinthians 4, verses 1 and 2. And we read this. This is how one should regard us, St. Paul said, as servants of God and stewards of the mysteries of God. Now it is required of stewards that they be found trustworthy. I see him quoting that often, that he's a servant of Christ and a steward of the mysteries of God. The mysteries of God, of course, are the sacraments that the priest takes care of. But of course, it's the deeper sense of the mystery of God's presence in the incarnation and in the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's what his life was about. So let's go to our little travel log here, and we'll go to Wadowice, this town in the Austrian sector, the birthplace of Karol Wojtyła. Again, it's been pointed out that the year of his birth, 1920, 100 years ago, was within a couple years of really the rediscovery of freedom in Poland after World War I brought to ruin the great empires. Poland found its new life again as a country, and it could openly celebrate its language, its literature, its religion. And JP2 was born into that, and he thrived in it. You know, his father, being the Austrian officer, would read to him from the literature, tell him the history of Poland. What an amazing thing. He's born not even right across the street, across the alley. You could reach out and almost touch the church. Actually, they tell you the story there that he kicked a soccer ball out there and it hit against a church window. I can't remember how that goes, but he's born right there in this place of devout parents, open to the influence of these various things, and he really grew and flourished. And the students, you can see them going through this museum. They love this museum. You know, the Poles do museums very well, wouldn't you say, Richard?
I would say, and you know, that museum is incredible. It's one of my favorite museums of all time.
Yeah, the way they brought together his actual place where he lived. So you see the small, modest, but well-kept little place. And then in the other rooms, we see artifacts from his childhood, his seminary life, his whole life, including the attempted assassination. It's a great place to visit, and again, this is a learning experience. I tell the students, you know, we're going to be going from 7 to 7 every day, and you are going to be learning. But it's fun. It's challenging to see these things. Now, yeah, go ahead, Richard.
It's a terrific place, you know, and what strikes me is the small town. It's yes. Almost humble place. And to think that is the crucible for the formation of one of the most inspiring saints, certainly of modern times, is just all. It shows you the work of God to use a humble village, if you will, as the start of something terrific.
Yes.
And you get that sense with Wadowice. It's a terrific place, and you know, his humble home, now a museum. And they've integrated technology in a way to enhance it and really take you back to that time and then bring you forward into the future. It's just an incredible and inspiring place. So I'm so glad our students get a chance to visit that one.
Well, you know, since you brought that up, and we'll see the footage now of the students going into the church where he was baptized, served as an altar boy, received catechetical instruction. When he returned in 1979, he was able to visit Wadowice, and I'd just like to read a passage or two. He said, "It's with deep emotion I arrive in the town of my birth, the parish in which I was baptized, and the surroundings to which I was linked for 18 years of my life." And then he says this, he really focused on the baptismal font because he saw that as the sign of his Christian faith and the gift that he was given by God. And he said, "When I look back over the long path of my life, I reflect on how the surroundings, the parish, my family, brought me to the baptismal font of the church at Wadowice, where I was given on 20 June 1920 the grace to become a son of God, together with the faith in my Redeemer. I have already solemnly kissed this font in the year of the millennial of the baptism of Poland when I was Archbishop of Krakow. So the students do see that and are able to touch that font and then look around the church and see this great testimony to faith and how it formed him as a young man. And then we'll walk up the hill. You'll see the students walking through the square. Yes, we do try one of those special cakes that John Paul II loved so much at one of the coffee shops.
I love those. It inspired my wife to come home and try to bake her own. It was a lot of fun.
Good. It's a high point, and then we go up the hill, and we discover this great Carmelite monastery, the sanctuary of Saint Joseph, opened by Raphael Kalinowski, who was a Carmelite I'm going to return to talk about his influence. But we will see there the spot where he received his first scapular. Many don't know what that is, but it's that Catholic devotion in which a Catholic person can wear around their neck a little cloth that shows Jesus Christ on one piece and on the other piece Mary with the child Jesus. And it's just a way of saying, I want to remember every day my commitment to Christ and his mother. And he received that first. And I would just like to say here, I'm going to show some footage with Father Witold being a translator and knowing these priests. We get an amazing tour of the monastery. We go to the very cell of St. Raphael Kalinowski, and I'll show a little bit here, but I want to come back at the end to hear more about this great saint. Our next stop is Kalwaria Zebzydowska. I can't remember if you made it to that spot.
I did. It was because it's so proximate to Wadowice.
Yes.
We sort of, when we were there, our tour guide said this is a place that a lot of tourists don't make it to. It's more of a pilgrimage site, and
yes.
we were so excited to go there, and it's an incredible place to visit.
Just 10 miles from Wadowice, no more than 20 from Kraków. This site was important throughout the life of Karol Wojtyła, and I will have to show the video because it's a hard place to describe, to convey its beauty or its spiritual power, its importance to Polish Catholicism. Basically, it's this huge area that was owned by a noble family, Zebzydowska, who turned it into this pilgrimage site. When pilgrims could no longer get to Jerusalem, he built a Jerusalem. That's why it's called Calvary. That he actually measured out how far it would be from Pilate's trial up the Calvary where Jesus Christ was crucified. And then over the years, they built up to 42 chapels showing these different mysteries of Christ and those also of his mother Mary that are well documented in the Bible about her, the Annunciation, the wedding at Cana, the various places where Mary's life does intersect the life of her son. So we made it a mini pilgrimage, as you'll see here. Climbing, we started at the house of Pilate, where they have a representation of Jesus brought before Pilate, and we walked up the hill. And that day, Polish pilgrims are coming down the hill, chanting their songs and hymns, and we are going up. I stopped and read some of his poetry at the place where he was helped to carry his cross. And I read him some of that poetry, and then we go up the hill. And it takes a lot of work going up that hill. So you can imagine what it's like carrying a cross. And that's how Weigel describes it in his book, The City of Saints. He says that Kalwaria Zebzydowska actually, perhaps the idea is best captured by the Protestant biblical scholar N.T. Wright, who says to believe means to act and live in a way that one is saved by Jesus as the crucified and risen Lord.
For you. This is the passage of the Lord. I will execute judgment, for I am the Lord, and this blood shall be unto you a sign. And I shall see the blood, and shall pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you. When I shall strike the land of Egypt, behold, in peace is my bitterness transformed. Thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, nor wilt thou give thy Holy One to see corruption.
And that's what these little pilgrimages do, is that as one walks along the path, and actually there's a famous time of the year, well, at Easter and at the time of the Assumption, where thousands and thousands of pilgrims throng there, and they act out the life of Christ. So Christ, there's a Pilate, there's a Christ, there's an Andrew, there's Mary, and they live out that life. So this one is, I think, one of the most astounding places to learn not only about John Paul II's prayerfulness, but about how John Paul II absorbed as a young boy, again through his whole life, and when he returned as Pope, this meditation upon the life of Christ.
Well, and John, what strikes me is it's such a beautiful place too. You have the basilica that's there, which is just gorgeous, set in a natural setting that brings the environment of both man's sort of creation, but really God's creation through man in some ways with the natural element. The last three popes have all visited there. Yes. So it's a place where many pilgrims truly understand there is a mystical element to that place.
That's the word. You know, Poland has a very deep mystical tradition, in part brought from the Eastern influence, but also through that Carmelite and Benedictine influence that was there from almost the beginning of the foundation of Poland. In 966, the Benedictines came in the 11th century, the Carmelites not too long after. So let's move up now to Kraków, and there'll be two places here. One is Debniki, where he lived in another small little spot and was a member of the parish where he discerned his vocation. And then we'll walk across the river to the Jagiellonian University, about a mile walk. This happened in 1938. You know, his mother died when he was 9. When he graduated from high school, he and his father moved from Wadowice to Kraków so he could attend the Jagiellonian and study Polish language and literature. Many things transpired here. You know, he was influenced by the Salesian priest in this working class neighborhood of Kraków. He enrolled in his classes. He became reacquainted with a priest from Wadowice who was working as a priest in the Wawel Cathedral. Karol continued his passion for theater, working with the Rhapsodic Theater. And of course, it was at this point also when the Nazis, the Germans invaded Poland. So this little place, it's remarkable when you visit there, really, how small and modest this place is. You have visited there, Richard, haven't you?
I have. That was one of the things that it is still a small, modest place, even though the great saint lived there. So modest, though, we were walking in the neighborhood and found it, had to ring the doorbell, and then a gentleman came and asked us if we'd like to come in and see the lower level where John Paul and his father lived. And then, walking around Krakow like that was terrific, because you got the sense of where he lived, and then where the stone quarry was, the chemical plant, when he had to work during the occupation. It's not a small distance, but again, I think it shows us how the Lord puts great people in humble places sometimes. And then the proximity to Wawel and the Jagiellonian, I mean, you're more familiar with it than I am, but it strikes me as a place that we want to be. If we are students of John Paul II, we want to be in his footsteps.
Yes, and so, I was rereading The Gift and Mystery, and he mentioned that they actually invited another family to live with them during the war. That was not unusual for the Polish people, their generosity to make do in these difficult circumstances. But it happened to be his mentor in theater, Mieczysław Kolarczyk, who was the founder of the Rhapsodic Theater. And he said in these little rooms they would do their Rhapsodic Theater, which was reading literature, drama, with minimal props, partly because of necessity, but more the very idea was to let the living word resound. And they jokingly referred to that little house as the catacombs, because they had to turn the lights out so the Nazis wouldn't see they were in there doing something. Kolarczyk later even said we would read by candlelight, and it was very romantic. I think that's the Polish spirit. During the war, they lit candles and read the poetry to each other. But also it explains why he went to the Jagiellonian. I want to read this little passage where he said, "By studying Polish and Slavic language, I came to appreciate language itself, the mystery of language, and the Word." So he even called it the theater of the Word. He said the Word is present in human history as a fundamental dimension of man's spiritual experience. And it brings us back to the mystery of God himself, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. So you see, John Paul II, in this early stage of his life, is thinking poetically, he's thinking religiously. It's faith and reason together with a great way of life to give witness and testimony to the power of the Word in its many dimensions. So, before we get up to the Jagiellonian, we will stop and look at these sites. This visit to his church of Saint Stanisław Kostka. Now, that one wasn't open for you, was it, Richard?
It wasn't. We didn't have a chance to go there.
Yeah, it's very close. I have to tell you, the first 2 years I couldn't get in. Every time I went, it was closed. And finally, we went on a Friday just by chance, and the women who put flowers on the altar were in there. They opened the door, greeted us, said, "Come any Friday, we'll be here and let you in." So, of course, we made a donation to the Flower Fund and discovered really the glory of this church. Because, let me just tell you, as you'll see the students going through, 3 amazing things. One is the Salesian Fathers who are commemorated here. They, of course, are the order started by John Bosco, St. John Bosco. They have a great ministry for education. They're still very present in Poland. I just stayed with them in February before the COVID curtain came down, and right near Dubnicki, but almost all of them were rounded up and sent to Dachau. And you see their pictures on the wall, and John Paul II said again how he admired their courage, their witness to the faith. 1 or 2 priests remained, but then they appointed this unlikely person to be minister to youth, Jan Tyranowski, who was a tailor. And of course you can go by his house in this working neighborhood. It's now used for something else, but he is buried there. He is now venerable, and his cause for canonization is being considered. But you see in this painting above his tomb, he is facing us, handing John Paul II a rosary. And John Paul II is turned towards this light, the mystery of God. So this tailor introduced him to a deeper way to say the rosary, to understand that Mary enhanced his devotion to Jesus Christ. He introduced him to John of the Cross and the whole Carmelite tradition which he knew as a child. Now he sees John of the Cross as a poet. He learns about Teresa of Avila and the importance of prayer. And again, one learns and sees that in this church. And then finally, as you go to the back of the church, we will see this chapel now called the Vocation Chapel with stained glass that shows the life of Wojtyła. And this is where he prayed and discerned by age 22 that God was calling him not to be a poet or actor. He could have been a very famous one, or married, but to be single for the Lord as a priest. And this is the spot really where it happened.
Well, you know, John, when I think about the relationship and the formation of John Paul II, and how Jan Tyranowski was so vital to that, I can't help but think that we see that playing out later, the need for the power of the laity in the world when Vatican II calls the people of God to universal holiness, and the sort of the resurgence of, you will, of the laity in that dynamic. And I think that John Paul II understood that. He was a gateway for him in some ways to his vocation and to what happened in the latter part of the 20th century and the beginning of the third millennium.
You're exactly right, and that's why he is a model and so inspiring to lay people to see their vocation in the church, to live their Christian life in everyday circumstances. So as we go up to the Jagiellonian here, you'll see us as we cross the Wisła, the Vistula River, which he would do every day. And then at the Jagiellonian, we won't stay a long time here other than just to see a couple basic things. You know, this is a university founded in 1367. Its most famous professor was Copernicus. We first stop in front of what is the Collegium Novum, which was built at the end of the 19th century. Now it houses the rector and some lecture halls, but in there, the professors were rounded up at the beginning of World War II by the Nazis and sent to concentration camps, and the university was closed. So again, Wojtyła is learning the hard way the tragedy of war, the brutality of the dictators and tyrants and totalitarianism. But the Poles don't give up. They carried on underground education. He continued his education, eventually even studying theology. But what this university represented to him, because he would come back to study there when he returned from Rome. He actually got the last PhD in theology before the Russian communists shut the theology department down. And that is that reason is an expression of the human person's spiritual nature. That's how Weigel explains the significance. The Jagiellonian, whose motto is reason rather than force. You know, the irony that they had been brutalized by two dictators, but they maintained their existence. And John Paul II was a great supporter of the university.
The Jagiellonian continues today, right? And so it's those places that, again, another step in his formation, and that understanding of reason is so vital.
Yes, and that I'll put in the plug for the University of St. Thomas. We're carrying on the tradition of the Jagiellonian and the other great universities who combine faith and reason. It's an aberration to kick out the theology department and not study the Bible. That's what the university was founded to do, is bring all the voices, science, poetry, literature, logic, as well as the Bible, theology, so that there can be that fruitful dialogue of faith and reason, which we are doing here at the University of St. Thomas in Houston.
Well, and you know, even the physical setup of the academic mall at the University of St. Thomas, with the chapel representing faith on one end of it, and on the other end is the library representing reason. And so you have in between that this great dialogue that happens between the two, with the ultimate purpose of God's revelation of truth. And so that's we see that playing out the Jagiellonian, founded in the 14th century, and the University of St. Thomas, founded in the 20th.
Well, look, as our last stop here, we're going up the hills of outside of Krakow to Czerna and learn about St. Raphael Kalinowski. We've seen this thread going back through his youth with the Carmelite monastery in Wadowice, founded by Kalinowski, learning from Tyranowski about John of the Cross. But you see, this spirit of Carmel is the spirit of prayer. It's a constant in his life. And we stay, the students stay at this monastery, at the Pilgrim House. We get a lecture from a monk on John of the Cross. We tour various parts of the monastery. And I'm going to share a little place. This is back in Wadowice, but one of the Carmelites showing us the cell of Raphael Kalinowski. Now, he was a Polish man who was born back in 1835 in Vilnius, of a Polish family, and became an engineer, worked for the Russian government because Russia was dominating this part of Poland, and in 1863 participated in the January uprising to try to throw off the Russian yoke. He was captured in 1864 and sent into a 10-year exile in Siberia. He had to walk to Siberia and then maintain himself. You know, Solzhenitsyn showed how the communists used that punishment, but there are deep roots in the Russian authoritarianism to use exile to Siberia as a punishment. Now, during this time, he became an educator. He realized he had the gift of teaching. He had abandoned his Catholic faith and returned to it. So when he was released from exile, he spent a year or two as a tutor of actually a prominent Polish family's child, the Czartoryskis, but he did come to join the Carmelite monastery. He had to go to Austria to become a member because of the Russian control over the area, but he came back to Czarna He actually founded the monastery in Wadowice, or the friary there. He was a great saint who loved to hear confessions of people, to advocate prayer. He died in Wadowice in 1907. So see, 13 years later, that's where John Paul II was born. Many people were already looking at visiting his tomb, carrying away, or his grave, dirt from his grave, because they thought he was a saint. He was so revered. Now his body was exhumed and moved to the monastery in Czerna, where now as a saint he was canonized by John Paul II in 1991. So I hope you can see, Dr. Ludwick, why this trip to Poland, the study abroad, and how we integrated into our MA program, why this context of Polish history and culture is so important. We go to over 20 sites. You can see just in these 5 spots how Karol Wojtyła responded to the beauty and tragedy of his life in Poland, and the challenge led him to his decision to be a priest, go on to be a great philosophy professor, a bishop and cardinal, eventually pope. So with these 5 days in Poland, one can see deeply the influence of these origins on his whole life.
You know, Dr. Hittinger, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for bringing this program to the University of St. Thomas and really working to develop the understanding of this great saint. When you look back at the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century, you know, people can't help but understand, I think, and see the impact that this holy man, St. Pope John Paul II, brought to the world. And to fully understand him, you have to understand sort of how he was formed and the traditions. And you know, you and I were discussing earlier how the program that is developed here under your leadership at the University of St. Thomas is one that I think he would be very proud of, because it is holistic. It brings together faith and theology, obviously, and philosophy, but more than that, it brings together the word, the language, the politics, geography, environment, and certainly people. And so that's what's so wonderful about the trips that you take. It immerses people into that formation that John Paul II brought to the world, and gives us much stronger understanding of that mystical connection between the Holy Trinity, John Paul II, and by extension to all of us. So thank you so much for that.
Well, Dr. Ludwick has been so supportive of this program. I would now ask you, listeners, if you've seen the work we're doing here at the University of St. Thomas, this life-transforming experience and study of the life and thought of St. John Paul II. Perhaps you will help us out. We particularly are in need of providing scholarships to students so they can take this course of study and to travel to Poland and get the full experience of knowing the life and thought of St. John Paul II. Thanks for joining me today, and until next time, do widzenia.